people know why they went to college? Like if we start there.
I think a lot of people go to college for the experience, right? Like that idea of a college experience, and because it feels expected of them, and like, oh, well, what am I supposed to do if I don't? Right. And so I think that there are a lot of just stigmas in place in general about not going to college right now, which sucks because college puts you thousands and thousands of dollars in debt. And so if you don't know what you want to do, or if you don't know what the purpose is, what the hell's the point, right? But yeah, I think a lot of students kind of show up with this idea of like, here I am, now what kind of mentality. And it's really tough too, because a lot of universities have become very pre-professional now. And so if you're not in like a track that's completely linear, like med school or like pre-law or something like that, then you feel kind of really like left behind or confused about what paths are out there for you.
Thank you guys for joining us for another edition of hashtag Not Advice. I'm sitting here today virtually with Maddie Gregory. She is a mental health clinician and a career exploration counselor. I think, I think you're kind of a perfect person to have on right now, just with your background in both your roles. So I think we can have a good conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the pandemic is affecting a lot of things in mental health, and hitting a lot of different kind of layers of just awfulness, I guess, like for lack of better terms, right? So absolutely, I think mental health is at the forefront and the core of a lot of the stuff that's going on.
So if I come, so if you put me, if I'm one of your clients for the day and I come in for a session, it's kind of like our first one, and I'm just like, Maddie, what's going on? I just feel like I don't really have control of my life right now. A, B, C, D is going on. I'm stuck. Where do we start? Like, what's kind of like ground one when you're onboarding a new client and kind of like figuring things out?
Yeah, good question. I feel like this is going to be like a stupid answer, but it's different for everybody, right? Like depending on what kind of comes up through that A, B, C, and D type of stuff, you can kind of move and shift to different spaces. But I would say trying to understand A, B, C, and D, and really like go deep and understand what the like the root cause, and what's really driving the distress and the feeling of stuckness, right? Like a lot of times people feel stuck because they feel a little bit helpless, right? So trying to figure out what it is that's causing them to feel in that space, and then figure out ways that we can effectively move forward, whether it's like teeny tiny steps or whatever kind of feels like, okay, this is what I can do to kind of process, or this is what I can do to take a step out of this, or to reflect. It depends on what the individual brings into the room, right? Like if you come at me and you're like, hey, I'm like feeling really stuck because I lost all of my coping mechanisms due to COVID because I can't see my friends and the gyms are closed, right? It's like, yeah, like that's really, really hard. Like let's kind of figure out maybe what some other coping mechanisms we can do are, or what else has worked for you in the past, or just kind of reflect on like that feeling that it does suck. And you are right? Like it is really, really hard. And there's not much that we can say to make that go away, but sometimes just validating that like that existence of the suckiness or the stuckness is there is beneficial to move you forward. You definitely have like external and internal processors, right? And sometimes if you're being pushed to externally process when you don't want to, it doesn't really feel safe, or it doesn't feel like something you're really engaging in, then it could actually kind of cause more of a rupture, right? Like I'm even picturing, I don't know, like I'm an external processor, especially when I'm in an argument with someone, and I always want to try to solve the problem immediately because I get anxiety from not solving that problem, right? Whereas me pushing to solve that problem immediately, or talk things out, or force someone to process when they're not ready, is actually causing anxiety in my partner or whoever the person is that I'm fighting with, right? And so it's just an interesting dynamic, the ways that like the internal and the external can kind of counteract or work against each other sometimes.
Now, do you notice that in your profession as well? Like, are there times where you're like, hey, maybe I'm pushing this person too far? Or are there times where you're like, I've maybe looking back on it now, I didn't push that person enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely to both, right? Like there are times when maybe we stepped a little bit too far, and part of my work is working with individuals who experienced really difficult traumas in their life, and so that can be a really scary and difficult thing to do because you have to kind of relive pieces of your worst moments sometimes to work through stuff. And so sometimes you leave therapy feeling worse than you came in. And that's part of the process of working through some stuff. And like there's definitely spaces where therapists can re-traumatize clients all the time. And that's why it's really important to establish like grounding techniques and like a sense of safety and a space where the individual feels empowered to be like, no, I'm not doing this anymore, right? And say like, take a step back, which is absolutely okay. So I think like, yes, absolutely. There are times when it's like, damn, maybe I shouldn't have pushed so hard. But I think usually it's kind of like a teamwork process, or it's a collaborative process where it's like, while we're kind of moving through those spaces, we're trying to figure out like, I guess, is this okay while I'm here, right? I have one foot in my trauma, one foot in reality. And as I'm kind of walking through this space with you, I'm checking in, I'm noticing your breathing, I'm noticing like what's going on in your body, which is a little bit more difficult over Zoom. But like noticing these core pieces and trying to like pull us back and pause in the content sometimes to like sit with the process of what's actually happening in the room or in the virtual room, right? And kind of slow us down sometimes and say like, all right, let's pause. Like I noticed that when you said this, you actually laughed, but you were highlighting something that was really sad. Like, tell me about that. Or I noticed that when we started talking about this, you started to cry. Like what's going on like inside you right now when we're talking about that or we're thinking about that. So kind of slowing people down sometimes when we get to that point, I think is important. But on the other side, right, like this idea of maybe I didn't push this person enough. Absolutely. I think there are times when like I meet with someone and it's just kind of like, it feels like a really casual chat. Like it's just like a chat with a friend, right? For like an hour. And you kind of meet the individual where they are for that day. And I think like there's this space of like trying to build rapport and be in alignment with an individual and trying to kind of, yeah, just meet them where they are and kind of be with them, talking about their week and talking about how school was or how work was. And that's okay, because usually those surface level things have some additional things that are connected to them as well.
So kind of a lot of what I'm gathering from, I guess, all the answers you've given me is it's really a lot of like teamwork, collaborative, a lot of work the person has to do internally on their own. It's not really like I come, I hang out with you and, I feel better and it actually like is working for me. It's really like, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Like the framework that I work in is like a trauma focused intersectional kind of space where we're pulling at a lot of different things. And so what I help people to do or figure out is to like just understand their past experiences and recognize the patterns that are currently in play within those experiences and how they're kind of like showing up in the current space, right? And then working on tools or skills or pieces of things to just notice as you're going through your day-to-day life, to recognize that it's like, oh crap, like how can I kind of switch myself off of autopilot so I'm consciously in charge of my decision making, of my actions, of my choices, like those kinds of things. So yeah, it's definitely like you work on stuff within the session, but then it's definitely like you kind of have to practice what you work on in session. It's like game day versus practice, right?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I bet for a lot of them, the therapy session probably feels a lot like a game day, because it's like you're pulling at a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like they have to face it there and then like go live it out.
Yeah. And like I said before, like sometimes you leave therapy feeling worse than you came in. And that's because you kind of like poke at a lot of things and like just loosen up some pieces and work through some stuff that maybe you didn't even know was there, which can be really, really hard. But yeah, I mean, I think there are, especially like our competitive people out there in the world, right? Like you come in and you're like, ooh, like I want this person to like me, or I want to do a good job, or I want to get an A, right? Like there are definitely spaces like that. And so thinking through I mean, that's part of the relationship as well, right? Is like recognizing like is this part of people pleasing? Is this for you? Like, is this that external validation piece that you're looking for? So I don't know. That was like a non-answer, but.
No, I think this is hashtag not advice, right? So it's kind of like there's
Yeah.
a lot of open-ended. I guess I could have called the show open-ended.
Right.
Maybe that might be a segment I bring you on for. And we go live and it's called open-ended, and people ask us things just for us to really give them no answer at all.
Just to walk around in circles. Honestly, though, that's like what therapy is in a nutshell, because you're not supposed to give advice. And what you're supposed to do is just kind of like notice things casually, right? And like point things out to people and get them to recognize certain things. And it can kind of leave you with like, okay, now I have all this stuff, right? And like, what do I do with it? And it's like, you get to decide. And sometimes that can be really frustrating for people to like not have an individual then tell them like, okay, first you take this cord and plug it into that wall, you take this cord and plug it into that wall, right? Like it can be really unnerving for some people. Like, trying to figure out what you're doing, what for who, right? Like that was a weird way to say it, but like this idea of who's making the decisions for you. Like if you're choosing to go into a certain career, if you're choosing to act a certain way, are you doing it for you or are you doing it for other people? And at the root of it, is that based in fear or is that based in your values and what you kind of, the goals that you want to lean towards? Right. And so sometimes going backwards to go forwards can be really helpful in terms of like just exploring a sense of self, right? Like what are the identities that you like feel closely with, and how do you identify yourself, whether that's like as an athlete, as a sister, as a dog lover, as a like whatever, right? Like sometimes going backwards and thinking through like what are the core pieces that really make me me, and what are my interests and what are my values and what are my personality traits, preferences, skills, strengths, all of those things. And that can usually help you kind of take a step outside and think through like, all right, so when I'm making this decision, whatever it might be, am I doing it for me or am I doing it for others? And then thinking through those motivation patterns of like, all right, if it's for others, like why do I feel so pushed to do this thing? Is it that I am searching for prestige? Is it that I'm trying to impress people? Is it that I don't know, like I feel obligated to make this decision based off of certain life circumstances, right? Like there can be a lot of factors at play. And I think that it kind of boils down to this idea of values versus fear, right? Like what am I making my decisions towards and for who?
Values versus fear. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that yours? You made that up, or you learned that and he learned that?
No, I just like a lot of times with both clients and students, I do something called a values card sort with individuals just to clarify what our values are and like give some common language for like how we can describe what those values are. And then it can be really great to do that because it's almost like liberating then to see like, oh my God, these are my top 5 core values. Like, how can I revolve my life more around these? And a lot of times we can see that like, if I'm not currently leaning into these things, I'm not really in alignment with myself. And like, maybe that does mean I'm living for other people. Maybe that does mean I'm living for my parents, my friends, my peers, my boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, whatever, right? Like there are, it really quickly and clearly demonstrates like, am I in alignment with my values or am I not? And if I'm not, what do I want to do about it?
Yeah, that the value, would you call it a value card sort?
Yeah, value card sort. So it's like
Yeah,
we like print out all these like paper cards and they just have different values on them, like making an impact or I don't know, being in the authority, right? Like the ones I'm thinking of off the top of my head are revolving around work right now because I just got done a full work day. But like and then once you kind of go through them, we sort them by high, medium, or low importance. And then you take the high importance cards and you break them down into 10. And then you take those 10 and you break them down into 5. And then you take those 5 and you break them down into 3. And it can be really challenging for some people because it's really hard to let go of values, right? Like you're basically saying like, okay, I'll prioritize this one over this one. And you have to give a reason why, which is important because you're not going to get all the values that you want in life, right? Like you can hold 50 values at your core and say like, yes, these are all the things that I value. But when you walk into a relationship or like a work environment, you're going to have to sacrifice some of those because there's no way you're going to get everything. And if you keep searching for everything, then there's going to be like you're just never going to be happy, right? So you have to kind of sacrifice some things in order for something good and prioritize what's really important.
Yeah, we might have to bring you back to do an interactive like value card sort.
Yeah, I love that. I do.
I think I like that, how it sounded. I think a lot of people could benefit from even just knowing how to do those internally,
Yeah.
especially in this kind of world of we're all isolated or, you know, socially distanced. So
Yeah.
I think we might have to bring you back for that for sure.
Yeah, down. That'd be fun.
So, I guess, what do you think? There's a lot in the news, you know, Facebook, Google, and antitrust and all that kind of stuff. So, I guess from your profession, what do you see as like a impact of social media? I guess positively. We'll start there. Like, do you see anything that's like positive, come from social media,
Yeah.
your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like social media does amazing things for just information sharing and like marketing in general, right? Like there are so many different counselors and therapists and just sites and programs and stuff out there that I follow on Instagram that I get so much information from. And it's just like a really cool way to collaborate with people that are in your field and learn from people like you and just get different perspectives and different modalities of ways to do things. And I just really gather a lot of information from Instagram, from Twitter, from TikTok even, right? Like there are a lot of really cool ways that people push information out there now, which is really impressive and I think really helpful too, because therapy is not accessible to everybody, right? Like, so having some different opportunities to get information and to learn is really important.
So I guess the easy thing to point out, I guess, is like the negatives you always hear kind of like people talking about, but I kind of feel they're overstated. So I guess from, you know, your point of view, I'm interested to hear like what do you think are the negatives of social media?
What are the negatives? Just information overload, right? Just to go complete devil's advocate on what I just said. Um, and the comparison culture that social media brings, right? Like we're constantly comparing ourselves to others and comparing our lives to others and looking at everybody's highlight reels on like their Instagrams or whatever and assuming that that's their reality all the time when the reality is people are only posting their best moments, right? So like if you're only posting your best moment, you don't get to see the negative pieces, you don't get to see all the photos that they chose not to post, right? And so like we're curating this reality of who we are, right, as people on this platform that demonstrates to a lot of other people that even if I don't know, just that like this is who I am and I'm happy all the time, and I do this all the time and this is what my life looks like, when in reality like everybody has the in-between periods in life and we're not going to take a photo of our lowest low and post it on the internet for people to comment and like, right? So I think it like paints this picture of everybody except for you feeling happy or feeling excited or having a really cool life, and then you look at everything else and it makes you kind of lean into that comparison culture, which is really toxic.
Yeah, I thought I like what you said about um it was how there's that in between, how we all
Yeah.
have, and I feel like why is like a people are we so uncomfortable with the in between or things being like two ways? Like why do we have such a need for stuff to be one way?
Yeah, because we search for meaning as humans, right? Like it's part of what we do in life is trying to figure out why things happened and give meaning and narrative and stories to them. And the negative part about that is that the stories that we create aren't always true, right? Like if I walk in the hallway in high school and I wave to someone and they don't wave back, I immediately start telling myself a story that that person hates me, right? When in reality, maybe that person didn't see me. Maybe they weren't paying attention. Maybe they were dissociating and spacing out, right? Like maybe like there's just so many other considerable options out there, but our brains sometimes take us to the worst possible places. And then it starts that negative spiral that kind of spins us down into this like just really anxious or negative space sometimes.
So, knowing all those things that we just talked about, do you use social media or just how you consume entertainment, media in general, differently, just based on like all the knowledge and experience you have, or are we human and you just still consume it the same way as everyone else?
I've gotten better as I've gotten older. Like there are accounts that I used to follow that I no longer follow just because every time I would look at them, they would make me feel like crap, right? And be like, oh, damn, I should work out or I should eat this or I should have a home that looks like this, right? I follow a ton of therapists and I do learn a lot, but sometimes even that, it's like, oh my God, I'm just tired. I just want to scroll through pictures. I don't want to read about dissociation or trauma, or which sometimes I'll scroll through and I'll skip, or like I'll read a little bit, but I think it's good to have the option, right? Like I like to have a little bit of both. I follow a ton of meme accounts and I also follow a bunch of my friends and everything. I follow you, Darryl, right? So like there's just like lots of ways. I think social media is great for connection. So I really value it for that space, but try not to follow a lot of accounts that make me feel a certain type of way. I think it's developmentally too, right? Like I have a lot more control over what I follow and don't follow on my feed, and like the autonomy to do so versus like a 13-year-old girl, right? So like there's a lot of other factors that are at play, I think too, but absolutely. I think like you definitely have the power to choose what shows up and what not.
I guess there's a lot of people here, whether it's COVID made them, lose their job and now they're out of work, or maybe COVID gave them the time to sit back and realize like, I like hate what I'm doing, like right now. Like what are some things and tips you give people to kind of figure out what next step they should do, professionally, or career wise? Like what are some like starting points that someone could do right at home? Like you said, some people don't have access to, counseling.
Think through those core pieces of self, right? Like we were highlighting earlier, the values piece and all of that stuff. Like when we think about career, it sits on a foundation of me understanding who I am and what's out there. And if one of those pieces are missing, you're going to feel in misalignment, right? You're going to feel not necessarily attuned with who you are or what you want to do or what feels good for you or your idea of purpose, right? And just I would think through like values, what your interests are, what some of those personality traits are, like maybe what environments you want to be in, what your leadership styles are, like those types of core pieces about who you are, and then exploring what's out there and outside of just the fields and the jobs that we learned about when we were like 10 years old, right? Like there's more to life than just being a doctor or a business person or a therapist or a professional athlete, right? Like there are so many things. Again, this theme of being in the in-between, like you have to do the research to figure out what's on the in-between, because most of what we gather is from our school experiences or our families, right? And school obviously doesn't give us all the answers, as we know, and neither do our families, right? Because they don't know everything. So it's up to us to really kind of explore the options that are out there. I would look inward and think about like, all right, what do I really enjoy? Like what brings me joy? What skills do I have? And what problems do I want to solve? And then kind of go from there.
I think that was a great way to sum it up.
Awesome. Sounds great.
All right, Maddie. Thanks for stopping by. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks, Darryl. Talk to you soon.